Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, it's been far too long. Our friend Elie Mystal is back. He's the nation's justice correspondent, of course, author of the New York Times best-selling book, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, which is now available in paperback, folks. So if you want a summer read, you want some fun and want to learn, I can't think of a better book than Allow Me to Retort. And here he is, the author himself, Elie Mystal. Hey, Elie, how are you?
I'm good, thank you so much. My the paperback version has a new chapter that I wrote especially about Dobbs.
Really? All right, we'll get to that at the end, but that's the tease for later in the show. So it's out in paperback, and there's a new chapter on Dobbs, which is great. So what's your reaction, not to the indictment or the elements of the crime and stuff, just the fact that DOJ actually charged Donald Trump with crimes?
I am so happy, right? Like, so let's start here. I said on your show, on any show that would have me, that my fear with Jack Smith was that he would be Bob Mueller too, right? That he was just the next white guy that they're throwing up to, oh, this guy will actually do something, and that we'll have to wait and see. Well, you know what? We've waited and seen. I said that Jack Smith would indict Trump for something because just to justify Jack Smith's existence. Having read this indictment, I was wrong about that. This is not a perfunctory indictment. This is not a covering your own backside indictment. Jack Smith did the investigation and threw everything that he had at Trump on this espionage, on these mishandling of classified documents. I don't see any punches pulled. I don't see any special treatment given. Jack Smith went out and, you know what, did a job. And so all credit to him. I'm still not willing to give Merrick Garland any credit, but all credit to Jack. And I'm happy that the DOJ charged him with something, right? This is a person, when we're talking about Donald Trump, we're talking about a person who has committed crimes for his entire public life and always seems to have been able to skate away scot-free from actual charges. These are serious federal charges. I wrote in The Nation, Dean, that this is like getting Al Capone for tax evasion. And I mean that in a good way, right? Like, obviously, I would like Trump to be in jail for trying to assassinate Mike Pence. I would like Trump to be in jail for sexually assaulting multiple women, right? But the fact that he could be in jail for, mishandling classified documents and storing, national security secrets in his bathroom, it might sound small, but these charges have teeth. And if convicted, Trump can, unlike the Alvin Bragg charges, if convicted on this, Trump can expect to see real jail time.
And, so Trump's got federal charges and state charges. I guess next international, like there's sort of like winning the Emmy, the Tony, and the Oscar, like the EGOT. There's got to be a legal version of, he's got everything. The Hague has got to charge.
Right. I've wanted Interpol to get on his behind ever since he tried to bribe the Ukraine. Right. So
right. Maybe, but I think you make such a great point, because we've talked before and we've shared our frustration on this show. And so is people like Glenn Kirshner, that the fact that how do you not charge Donald Trump for January 6th related charges all this time? This is very serious. 37 felonies, 34 of them, I believe, or 33 of them, 31 of them, I'm sorry, Espionage Act, each one up to 10 years. The obstruction, because they're really serious obstruction, up to 20 years. As even Jonathan Turley, who is despicable, who writes articles attacking me just with lies,
me too,
literally said that Trump could end up living out his life in prison if he's convicted on just one of the serious charges. He's right. This could be goodbye, Donald Trump.
Don't threaten me with a good time, Dean. Don't, because I mean, and again, I don't want to give any credit to Turley because he, as you say, he is a bad faith actor.
Yeah.
But just on the face of the indictment, if Trump is convicted on any one of these counts, that is a serious jail sentence for a very old man who lives off of vitriol and cheeseburgers. And so that is, serious as a heart attack for him. And again, I mean, I'm sure we'll get to the problems with it, but like the top line news that we should be happy about is that Jack Smith brought the thunder. And this might not be it, right? Because we know that Jack Smith is also now finally charged with investigating January 6th. We know, I think, last week they subpoenaed Steve Bannon. I believe Mark Meadows, or one of them, has testified as well. So like there could be January 6th charges coming as well. out of Jack Smith. It looks like with Smith, and I feel I can say this now, it looks like they finally got the right man for the job. After, a series of failures, they finally got the right guy for the job. And I, as I wrote in my piece, couldn't be happier to be wrong about the man. He seems like a serious player.
And don't forget, Mike Pence did testify after first making that motion, had to testify. That wasn't over classified documents. That was January 6th.
Yeah.
So we'll see. And if you're getting to Steve Bannon, you're probably getting near the end. I'm not positive, but I get a sense because he's almost like bringing Trump in, and you're not going to bring Trump in. He's the target of the investigation. So you mentioned Al Capone. It's a great analogy because Al Capone, as people know, they couldn't get him for murder and bootleg and everything else and racketeering. They get him for tax evasion. He ends up going to jail and being released late in life because he had syphilis and he was getting dementia, and then dies like sort of like, I don't know if it's completely with no money, but in Florida at a house, if I remember correctly. It's a great scenario for Trump. I mean, this is the trajectory I would love to see Trump with. He's already on the edge of some kind of mental illness. We know that. He's just getting crazy. I can't believe he's surviving this. And I mean, his stress level has got to be off the charts.
Well, evil, the fun thing about evil is that you sleep well, right? Like, you don't spend a lot of time, like, see, us normal people, we sometimes go to bed with like regret, right? We sometimes go to bed with like, reconsidering maybe we could have handled something. Trump has none of those problems. So I'm sure he sleeps, relatively easy at night. The other thing about the Al Capone kind of analogy here, though, is that, again, Al Capone was charged federally with tax evasion. And it was the thing about the tax evasion charges is that they happened because Capone was sloppy. They happened because he was cavalier. They happened because he thought he was untouchable. There's a reason why that movie is called that, right? Mm-hmm. They happened because of his own hubris, right? Having gotten away with murder and racketeering and all these other crimes, he thought that something small like tax evasion could never catch up to him. Similarly, I think when you look at Trump, having gotten away with a coup, having gotten away with bribing foreign governments, having gotten away with sexually assaulting women, having gotten away with everything else, I'm sure he never thought that like stealing documents and hiding them in his chandelier ensconced bathroom was ever going to catch up to him, right? And you can see in the indictment itself the brazenness with which he is mishandling these documents, and that's the thing that kind of jumped off the page for me in the indictment, right? Like, as you know, Dean, Trump's best legal defense to all of these charges is, sorry guys, I'm an idiot. I didn't know they were classified. I didn't know that I wasn't allowed to show them to these people. I thought they were declassified, blah, blah, blah. I had no criminal intent here. But in the indictment, Jack Smith has pointed out that they have this man on tape showing these documents to a staffer who did not have security clearance, saying, I shouldn't be showing you these documents, saying they're highly confidential, saying they're not declassified, and I can't declassify them anymore because I'm no longer the president. So they have him in the indictment blowing up out of his own mouth diarrhea his own best legal defense. It's brilliant, and I hope we see a trial about that before 2025.
I hope so too. I mean, I hope before the election, in a normal course of business, we would. We'll get to Judge Eileen Cannon in a second. But Bill Barr made a really good point, and something that, just if you think about it, it makes all the sense in the world. This entire thing was at the doing of Donald Trump alone. All he had to do was return the documents. There was no crime until he refused. And even when he refused in the beginning, and there's a really good analysis in the Washington Post that of the 130 plus classified documents originally returned, he was not charged with any of those, even though that was mishandling classified documents. They only charged him for the documents when they did the search warrant and going forward from then on. And because they were giving him, the ones, I guess the search warrant and the ones returned at the end that were really, they had to pull teeth to get, the only ones they charged with. It's kind of interesting. The point was, if he just simply returned it then when the subpoena came, this is done. There's no charge. They're not going to do the obstruction against him, just an obstruction count. It goes away. It's gone forever. He created this, and thankfully he's appears to be going to be held accountable for it.
I mean, look, it's the one charge, right, that really goes to this is the conspiracy charge, right? Like, if you just given them back, like you said, he wouldn't be in trouble. But he didn't just give them back, refuse to give them back. he lied about it. He lied about what he had. He ordered his lawyer to lie about what he had, and his lawyer was taking notes about what he was told to do, because his lawyer, Evan Cochran, he wasn't trying to go out like Michael Cohen, right? Like he wasn't trying to go down that same road. So that lawyer took voice notes about what he was being ordered to do, which was to lie to the FBI, which you're just not allowed to do. Like, I mean,
he's a former federal. Evan Corcoran is a former federal prosecutor as well. I mean, Glenn Kirshner knew him a bit, and talked about him in the past to me about how he was known as a good lawyer. And it shows, because he was not going to go to jail for Donald Trump. It showed.
I said this weekend, Dean, that even Hannibal Lecter didn't lie to the FBI. That wasn't his plan, right? He told Larry Starling everything she needed to know. Like Trump.
Quid pro quo, exactly. Quid pro quo, Clarice.
Like Trump actually sat there and just straight up lied to the FBI about where the documents were in his own damn house. Like that, you can't do that. That's why his boy Walt Nua is also in this indictment, right? Because he helped him carry out the lie, and obviously did not flip in an appropriate manner for Jack Smith's liking. So look, this, like I said with the Capone analogy, this is all being done. This is all happening to him because of his own brazen, cavalier hubris and disregard for the law, and that's why he's in the legal trouble that he's in now.
And what about, it's kind of remarkable, you mentioned the attorney-client privilege part being in the transcript of, or actually in the indictment. That is remarkable to see, an actual transcription of a conversation. And I know it's not word for word because it's not audio recorded. I don't believe it was recorded by audio, that part, but that the attorney-client privilege is known as being essentially sacrosanct, but there is an exception. And in this case, they made that showing to a judge who ordered Evan Corcoran to go testify. And Evan Corcoran told the truth clearly. I don't think he held anything back, because it was pretty damning what he said. If he's holding anything back, it was a big mistake. That's kind of remarkable, though, to see this.
Crime, fraud, exception, and attorney-client privilege, right? Like, you can tell your attorney anything and it dies with your attorney, unless what you're telling them is, let's go commit crime, right? Once you get into the let's go crime and Esquire, like that breaks the attorney-client privilege. Even Saul Goodman knows that, right?
Right.
And like you said, Evan Corcoran is not a terrible lawyer. He protected himself by taking notes about the crimes he was being asked to do. And that's why you see all of that in the indictment. So, I mean, look, all of this is great if Trump is ever brought to trial.
Maybe, perhaps it's kind of interesting too. And it reminds me, when I was reading the indictment, that Corcoran didn't want to sign the certification, that we look for the documents. He's like, no. And I imagine that conversation, so it's not part of a criminal element, so it's not in the indictment. But I imagine that conversation was like, Corcoran's like, I'm not doing this. You have to find someone else. And he goes, the former OAN anchor, who's my friend, it was like Alina Habba, whatever, get her. And she comes over and she knows right away there's something wrong. So she kind of qualifies it a bit. But that just smelled to high heavens, right? I'm sure right off the bat, DOJ was like, a lawyer qualifying the certification, and who is this person? She's not even in the attorneys of record.
Yep. I mean, look, yes, you're absolutely right. Like the whole thing, and like that's kind of one of the things that I like. If you could give Republicans truth serum, and kind of wean them off of Donald Trump's boots for long enough, right? You just like, what do you think went down, Lindsey Graham? Like, what do you think he was actually doing here, right? And like, all they've got is Hunter Biden's laptop. Like they've got no actual defense for Donald Trump and his crimes and his actions. All they have is, what about Hunter Biden? The New York Post this morning, literally their cover story, the headline is, what about the Bidens? Like that is how intellectually bereft Rupert Murdoch's media making machine is at this point, that they can't even pretend to articulate a defense of Donald Trump. All they've got is this kind of intellectually soft and dishonest whataboutism about, the current president's son. Like that's all they got.
And look, and I'm chatting with Elie Mystal. Elie, the fact that now a former president's been charged with federal crimes, serious ones, do you think this could impact conduct going forward of presidents of the United States of America?
I don't know, because Trump's, like most presidents of the United States of America, were not going to act like Trump anyway, right?
Right. True.
And the idea that, I mean, I've kind of talked about this a little bit since the indictment came out. I've avoided using the phrase, "This is the first time a president has been indicted in American history," because even though it technically is, I mean, Nixon got away with because Ford pardoned him. Like Nixon
Right.
was going to be indicted, and I
Definitely.
definitely think Nixon's bad behavior informed presidents going forward. What's interesting is that Nixon's bad behavior also informed the media going forward. People, and before Nixon, the media before Nixon gave presidents a wide pass for kind of potential misdeeds, and that all changed with Nixon. And I wonder if actually indicting Trump will have any effect, and it probably won't. I mean, I just talked about the New York Post, but I wonder if it has any effect on the news media to stop simply repeating Trump's lies and giving him unfettered opportunities to lie more, CNN town hall, and instead, like, if the media will resume its job of holding these people accountable, that would be more interesting to me if it happens, because I don't actually think that presidential behavior is going to be cabled simply by these charges. A conviction, if Trump gets convicted, and ends up in jail, I do think that a future president DeSantis, a future president Hawley, a future president, whatever one of these people comes out of the woodwork and tries to run on the Republican line, I do think that maybe impacts them a little bit.
And that's the hope. I mean, that, the idea that you're going to charge a former president with crimes for their crimes, which you should do, that the goal is deterrence. Right? I mean, that's part of our system. What about, let's talk about Judge Aileen Cannon, who, when she was the judge in the civil component of the search warrant, where they filed a lawsuit for a master was appointed, and then she's reversed by the conservative members of the circuit court above her, really just revert. And now she's back. And I'm like, this is terrible.
She wasn't just reversed. She was, the scientific term is, she was bench slapped by the 11th Circuit for her unethical and nonsensical opinion, appointing a special master to oversee whether or not Trump had executive privilege over the production of documents where he had no legitimate claim for executive privilege whatsoever. It was a terrible decision, and she got basically embarrassed by her conservative brethren on the 11th Circuit when it came up to them. And yes, now she's back. Now she's back for a couple of reasons. One, Jack Smith decided to file this case against Donald Trump in Florida. He did that because most of the crimes that we're talking about took place in Florida. He did that, I think, potentially intelligently, because it means that Trump can't legitimately ask for a change of venue. Like if he had been sued in DC, brought in DC, Trump's lawyers would have asked for a change in venue to Florida. And regardless of whether or not they win that lawsuit, it induces delay into the timeline. By just going straight to Florida, you kind of take that change of venue off the table and potentially accelerate the timeline. But by doing it in Florida, you've got two problems that obviously Jack Smith knew he was going to have coming into it. One, there are a lot of Trump-appointed judges in that Southern District of Florida judge pool. And just for people to understand, the way that it generally works is that when you file a federal lawsuit, there is a panel of judges who are picked usually by random lot to see who gets your case, right? There are a lot of MAGA judges in that judge pool, in that U.S. District Court judge pool for the Southern District of Florida. That's a risk Smith was willing to take. The other risk that he has to take is that if this goes to trial and it goes to a jury trial, you're picking from the Florida jury, which, it's different than picking from a Manhattan jury, right? And Smith knows that too. So these are, I think, calculated risks that Smith had to take. And the first calculation basically played out as bad as possible, getting Aileen Cannon as opposed to any of the other judges that were available in that pool. That said, I don't think that Cannon is, there are two levels of danger here, right? And I think the biggest danger is not something that I expect Cannon to pull out of her hat, right? And the biggest danger is what lawyers call Rule 29. Most people don't know this, but a judge can set aside a jury verdict as a matter of law. It happens very rarely. It's very controversial when it does, but a jury can return a verdict guilty, and the judge can say, interesting thoughts, jurors. I'm setting that verdict aside because you were just wrong on the law, and this person cannot be guilty of the crime that he's being charged with. And so actually he's acquitted. Doesn't happen very often, but it is a power that trial court judges have. And I think the biggest fear with Cannon is that she might use that power to spring Trump. I don't think she will, because in addition to being a hack, I believe she's also a coward. Like if you just look at how she justifies her terrible opinions, they're not like Sam Alito, let's put it like that, right? She's afraid in some ways. And so I don't think she would use this kind of, I wrote about it, I called it a tactical nuke on the judicial system, but it's something to be concerned about. I just don't think that that'll happen. Instead, I think she will be a force for delay.
Mm-hmm.
Eileen Cannon, let's start here, Dean. Trump fired his lawyers, right? And so, as you well know, if you're the new lawyer that goes to the arraignment on Tuesday, one of the first things you're going to say is, "Hey, I just got here.
Right.
You need a long time before the trial because I need a long time to get myself up to speed because I literally just got here yesterday," right? And that's going to be a reasonable request, right? It's Eileen Cannon who gets to decide how much time Trump's lawyers need to get up to speed on the case. It's Eileen Cannon who gets to, most likely, set the trial date. It's Eileen Cannon that gets to rule on any motions for delay or documents or whatever that Trump's lawyers file. And it's Eileen Cannon's opinions that, even if they're wrong, have to get appealed all the way up to the 11th Circuit and potentially even the Supreme Court before they come back down and the proceedings can continue. So at every point, Eileen Cannon has a lot of opportunity and power to delay, to extend, to try to get this trial out of the immediate term and past either the Republican National Convention in July of 2024 or past the general election in November of 2024. She has a lot of power to do that, and I believe she will use all of the tricks in her bag in order to accomplish that goal for Trump.
She was so deferential to Trump in her prior case that she had that I could see her saying, if the defense makes a motion, well, Donald Trump's the nominee and we can't have a trial in the midst of the campaign, so can we put it off to after the election day? I could see her saying, sure. Also, the other thing is, we've talked about the attorney-client privilege. That was decided by a federal judge for the grand jury. I've been reading that we can expect the defense attorneys to make a new motion now to keep that out being admissible at a trial. And she could rule in that favor on that. She could dismiss charges based on Trump's lawyers' motions here and there, not the whole thing, but a few things around the edges if she can. It really is deeply problematic because her track record is blindly loyal to Donald Trump, even suggesting the idea that a former president should be treated a special way and deserve special treatment. That's fundamentally wrong. That is not consistent with our system of justice. Thank God Jack Smith ended that, but she's
100%. The lawyers will at some point make a motion to delay the trial until after the election because Donald Trump is a candidate for office, right? I think the question is, do they make that motion before the Republican National Convention or after? Because it's a much stronger argument after.
Sure, if he's a nominee.
If Donald Trump is actually the nominee, it's actually I would go so far as to say it might be a reasonable argument. I mean, quite frankly, it might be a reasonable argument to say, this is a major party candidate for a presidential election. We are 8 weeks, this trial is scheduled for 8 weeks, 10 weeks before that presidential election. These are extraordinary circumstances. We should delay this trial until after the election. That would be a reasonable request from a lawyer. And it's not just Eileen Cannon. This is what I'm saying, the problem with the general structure here. It's not just Eileen Cannon that might find that argument reasonable. It is Trump-appointed judges throughout the judiciary who might find that argument reasonable. I wrote about in The Nation about how we just got through Brett Kavanaugh and 4 other conservatives ruling in February of 2022 that we were too close to the November 2022 midterms to force Alabama to fix racially gerrymandered maps that it had. Now, last week, Brett Kavanaugh ruled that those maps were in fact pretty racist.
Right, I know. We're going to talk about that, but yeah.
And Alabama had to change them, right? But they still got through their election with those racist maps, right? And so Kavanaugh, if Kavanaugh is willing to say that we're too close to an election in February of 2022, ahead of November of 2022, what does Kavanaugh says when he gets an emergency appeal coming up from the 11th Circuit saying that trying Trump in September of 2024 is too close to the November general election? Do you think Kavanaugh would go for that argument? I do.
Sure, of course.
And I think 4 of his friends would too. So like you've got a real, as I've written, I think it's really hard to see how Trump is tried and convicted before he gets to run for office and try to overthrow the government again.
I'm telling you, Elie Mystal. So it clearly, if Trump were to lose a nomination somehow, Ron DeSantis or whoever the nominee is going to pledge to pardon Donald Trump to get the Trump supporters out. We all know that. But it's actually more dangerous for Trump if he is the nominee, because there's a question about self-pardon working or not. But think about what the stakes would be for this election in next November. It's not going to be about policy. It's about one man trying to stay out of prison. And what will he do? He already tried a coup to stay in power, to not lose his liberty. Folks, there's nothing off limits before, but now things we can't even think of are in play with this guy just to stay in power, just to win that election. And I shudder to think what will happen and what some of his supporters would do.
I said another wrinkle that we have to worry about with this trial is that if you set the trial before the election and Trump, again, he wins the nomination, he's the Republican candidate, every campaign ad in Florida, which, you know, for those playing along at home, is a state that is contested in every presidential election. Every campaign ad, every Trump and Republican campaign ad in Florida throughout the entire election cycle is basically jury tampering. It is basically a form of jury tampering because Trump will have airtime where he will be making his case directly to potential Florida jurors. And, you know, if you've ever lived in a battleground state like Florida, like Ohio, like Michigan during an election season, you know, it's wall-to-wall political ad campaign coverage. You can't watch a softball game without getting an ad during the commercial break for a political candidate, right? Trump is going to have nearly unlimited resources to flood the Floridian market with his legal defense under the guise of running for office. It's a mess. It's a mess to me to see how you pick a jury under these circumstances.
So this is pure speculation. I love to play this game called irresponsible speculation, but this one's less irresponsible. This is more grounded in what we know about Trump. If Trump somehow wins and the trial hasn't happened yet, or say he's even convicted, but no, say the trial hasn't happened yet, he's able to get Cannon to put it off, and then he wins, and the trial doesn't happen before January 20th. He's sworn in. Do you think he pardons himself, or does he direct DOJ, even though he's not supposed to, or his AG comes in and the first thing they do is just dismiss the case? So there's not even a question of self-pardon.
So if the trial hasn't happened yet and he's sworn in as president, he will direct the DOJ to dismiss the case. Mm-hmm. If the trial has happened yet and he's been convicted, but he hasn't been jailed because then he will try to pardon himself, and that, whether or not he has the authority of that, will go up to the Supreme Court, which, again, he's picked 3 of the 9 justices, and 3 more are dyed-in-the-wool Republicans. They tend to think that the pardon power is plenary on part of the executive, so it's possible that they will agree that he can pardon himself. But even if he can't pardon himself, I'll tell you what he's not going to do, Dean, is surrender to the federal penitentiary when he's the president of the United States. He's just not going to do that, right? So if you don't beat him in November, he will not go to jail, whether he's supposed to or not, right? The only way that you that you put this man in jail, the only way that you hold him accountable for these crimes is that you're going to have to beat him at the polls in another election. And that is the problem. That is why I've been screaming about Merrick Garland since January 7th, right? Like that, if you let him if you don't not just indict him, but indict him quickly,
Yeah.
you end up in this situation where he gets a free run at another election and thus another chance to overthrow the government before he will face consequences for his actions.
Do you think DOJ potentially charges Hunter Biden with something to try to look fair in this whole thing? I know that shouldn't come into play, but I just wanted that investigation was going on for 5 years. Just reading about it today. I mean, it's a long time. They should give a decision one way or the other. Either charge Hunter or not charge Hunter.
I mean, I have a low opinion of Merrick Garland, but that would be a new low. Like I don't think so. I don't think he's that pathetic. I don't think that he's so pathetic that he would charge the president's son basically to cover his own ass. Like I just don't. I don't think he do, because that's beyond being a coward. That's truly a move that happens with a person who is of low character. Frankly, okay. To go back to the Silence of the Lambs, right? Frankly, that's something Miggs would say, right? Like, frankly, that's like a Bill Barr move, not a Merrick Garland move, I don't think. So I don't think they'll charge him just because. I do think that if, whether it's Trump or DeSantis or whoever, if a Republican gets back into the White House in 2025, they will charge Hunter Biden with, the kitchen sink. They will charge him with capturing the Lindbergh baby. They will charge him with shooting Biggie and Tupac. Like they will charge Hunter Biden with something if Republicans take back control. But that's the other thing, Dean. And like we've seen that the Republican argument to defend Trump is simply like, oh, well, now we're going to do it to you guys. You think? They've already been done doing this to Democrats, right? Does everybody remember how a land deal in Arkansas named Whitewater ended up in Monica Lewinsky's closet? Like, how do you do that? Oh, that's because Republicans decided they had to get the Clintons by any means necessary. And they went and they investigated and they threw the kitchen sink until they found something that they could get the Clintons on. And that something was Clinton's horrible lies about having sex with that woman, right? But that's how they got there, from the standpoint of like, we got to get these hicks from Arkansas who have taken over our country. That's how they got there. And so I promise you, if Barack Obama had one classified document that was stuffed into the breast pocket of his jacket that he forgot to hand back, he would be in jail right now.
There are Republican prosecutors all over the country trying to make a name for themselves, thinking, how can I indict Joe Biden? Because who is it? Andy Biggs, that horrible congressman, said it's an eye for an eye. It's a wartime now. So they're going to try to find jurisdiction, some DA somewhere that Joe Biden drove through the district at one point. But getting back, before we take a break, so tomorrow Trump goes for his arraignment. Assuming he can find local counsel, he'll be entering a plea. He's got to go tomorrow, but he might, as of now, he doesn't have local counsel. Do you think Eileen Cannon, the judge, welcomes him like, Mr. President, like bring snacks? I got you a cheeseburger. Would you like a Diet Coke? What can I get for you? Foot massage? Because what she's doing, this is a judicial idol. She's auditioning for him because if he wins again, she's going up to the Court of Appeals, if not the Supreme Court, if there's an opening, because she's still young enough to actually be someone they would consider for the Supreme Court.
Oh yeah, I think she's going to debase herself over the course of this trial for Trump. The question is it worth it for the DOJ to try to get her removed? Is it worth it for Jack Smith to try to get her removed? There is a process. You can argue to the 11th Circuit that Eileen Cannon has already shown bias on the behalf of Donald Trump in the past, and it would undermine public confidence for her to be presiding over this trial. So pick another judge. You can ask. The 11th Circuit doesn't have to go along with it, but you can ask. The question is, excuse me. The question is, should they even ask? Because again, Dean, if you ask to remove Cannon, that process causes delay. It makes the timeline go even further. And like I said, there are other MAGA judges on that circuit that the media just doesn't know about yet, right? And so there's a little bit of, perhaps say what the devil you know as opposed to the devil you don't know. There's a little bit of maybe Cannon will be slightly chastised just because she's already been bench slapped by the 11th Circuit, and because the whole media is like onto her hack game now. Maybe she'll be a little bit play it a little bit more straight, even though we all know what she truly believes. There are arguments that Jack Smith shouldn't even try to remove Cannon, and I don't think that he will.
It's
so I think he might really be stuck with this woman.
Right, and he might. But if the DOJ ultimately at some point, and I guess would be early in these proceedings, made a motion to cause the recusal of Judge Cannon, they could use some of the argument that Trump's making against Judge Marchand here in New York, that he's biased, he's ruled against us already in the case with Trump Organization, that kind of stuff, like he's shown bias. And they could actually, I imagine you could use that against him, because while it's a lawyer's making the argument, it's in the name of the party. So they'll say, well, Donald Trump argued in New York that judge should be removed because of this, this, and that. We have similar factors, not exact, but similar here. So how can he now argue a different thing here? And maybe, but again, it does delay everything. And maybe DOJ is just gonna be like, we're going to go with the card that was drawn, such as life. It's random. We're going to go with it, and we can always appeal, and that causes delay. So be it.
Jack Smith knew that this was a possibility when he filed it in Florida. I have to think, and again, I am heartened again by the quality of the indictment. Let's play the game this way. Let's say that Jack has a plan to deal with this.
Jack's got a plan. He's our John Wick. Let's take a break. We're going to come back and chat with Elie Mystal more about this and the case in the Supreme Court last week that he just wrote about on the Voting Rights Act and more. I'll be right back after this. And we're back. Ready? And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. Elie Mystal stuck around. We usually lose guests at the break. Elie is still here. And by the way, his book, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, out in paperback now with a brand new chapter. It's Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, a New York Times bestseller, great book. But Elie, one last thing about DOJ before we talk about the VRA case, the Voting Rights Act case. Do you think that even though these are serious charges against Trump, and we touched on it earlier, do you think there's any sense from DOJ that you've seen that this is it, we're done, we don't feel any more pressure to do January 6th related charges?
No, I don't, because like I said, Jack Smith subpoenaed Steve Bannon last week. Right. So the grand jury in DC is still ongoing, looking at January 6th potential charges. Merrick Garland has given Jack the go ahead to investigate those charges. Obviously, Merrick doesn't want to do himself. So he's given the go ahead to Jack to investigate those charges. I think that investigation is ongoing, and we will see if there are charges relating to that. But again, having just had this entire conversation about how the timeline makes it very challenging to try Trump for the espionage before the election, every single day means that it makes it almost certain that he won't be tried for anything coming out of January 6th, even if Jack Smith does charge him until after the November election for his potential criminal acts regarding the coup, which means he'll get a chance to coup again. Right, which means he'll get a chance. He'll get it. Like, if you gotta, guys, you gotta think of it this way. Since January 7th, 2021, Trump's entire being has been focused on getting the opportunity to run for president again. And there was a time when the DOJ could have stopped him from doing that. The only way they were ever going to stop him from doing that was to bring treason and sedition charges against him, to have him be convicted on those charges, and then to invoke the operation of the 14th Amendment, which prevents traitors from running for office again. That was the only way. And I have said that was the only way pretty much since January 7th, right? Like that was always the only way to stop him from running again. And the DOJ did not do that, which means they did not stop him from running again, which means he's going to run again, right? He's
running.
And that is a problem from the perspective of holding him accountable for his attempt to overthrow the government. He's running again. He's going to get another bite at that apple. And all that we can do now really is, as American citizens, defeat him at the polls again. Sure. Because that's what it's going to take.
If Donald Trump wins and gets back in the White House, he does not leave alive. He does not leave voluntarily. Right. He will be there for the rest of his life, and the base of the GOP will be fine with it. and it's concerned. All right, let's shift gears here.
I just really quickly, I heard one, I forget which one of them, because they all look the same to me, but like one of the Republican candidates that's allegedly running against Trump said something like, oh, you should vote for me because I can serve 2 terms. I think it was DeSantis, because I can serve 2 terms where Trump can only serve 1 term. And I'm like, what fantasy world are you living in where the operation of the 22nd Amendment, which limits presidents to 2 terms in office, where Trump respects that fantasy?
I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for a reporter to ask him that. I've been begging on the show. I've written tweeted, where is a reporter with at the CNN town hall? Caitlin Collins should at least said, you're going to be a lame duck president on day 1. What's your reaction? Now a smart guy goes, but I'll get more done in 4 years. Anyone, he would say something like, we'll see about that. Boom, we have a constitutional crisis right there. And we would watch his base go, yes, why should it be limited? If the American people want him for a 3rd term, who gives a crap about the 22nd Amendment? That's what's going to happen. They'll say they're
non-consecutive terms, and they'll try to find some like legal argument that like actually it meant consecutive terms, not non-consecutive terms. Like if Trump wins in 2024, he is run and doesn't cheeseburger himself out. He is running again in 2028.
And his base will is. And the base. Cheeseburger himself out. That's a great term. I've shed that down here. So let's talk about your article last week on the Voting Rights Act surviving. You were shocked by the decision 5-4, but a lot of people, but you were sincerely shocked, and you wrote a really good article for The Nation about it. Tell us a little bit about the decision and why you were shocked. I think it's obvious, but why?
Yeah, so John Roberts, so this was a 5-4 decision ruling that Alabama's gerrymandering was too racist to survive the 15th Amendment and Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, right? And I am shocked by that opinion because John Roberts, the author of this close 5-4 opinion, has been an enemy of the Voting Rights Act and specifically Black people voting for his entire career. Not just since he's been on the bench. When he was a lawyer, his first job after clerking for William Rehnquist, who was also a guy who hated the Voting Rights Act, was to work for the Reagan White House arguing against the 1982 amendments that expanded the Voting Rights Act to account not just voter suppression, but voter dilution. Basically, to say that you can't dilute the votes of distinct minority populations away, right? John Roberts argued against that. Reagan, of all people, overruled him, having to tell young lawyer John that the Voting Rights Act was just too popular for even Ronald Reagan to be on the wrong side of. But Roberts spent the rest of his career trying to undo the Voting Rights Act. As a judge, as Chief Justice, every single case that has come before him, he has either voted to weaken the Voting Rights Act or ignore it entirely. He has never once, until last week, voted to affirm and uphold the Voting Rights Act. So hell yeah, I was surprised. I had to pick my jaw up off the ground when I saw that decision. I told you already, Brett Kavanaugh, who was the other conservative vote to make it 5-4, he had ruled previously that Alabama was allowed to use these very racist maps in the 2022 midterm elections. So for Kavanaugh to flip to actually these maps are super racist and Alabama should do something, yes, he already baked in the Republican advantage in Alabama, but just for him to change positions like that, again, shocking. So I was very happy with the ruling. I was surprised to see it there. Look, it's not the most chesty and robust defense of the voting right. It's not like if I had written it,
right?
Or if Ketanji Brown Jackson had written it, but it was a save, right? And so the Voting Rights Act survives. And the other thing that I've tried to point out is that you have to understand how close the Voting Rights Act was to death. The challenge here was to straight up call Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act unconstitutional as applied to the states, meaning that you couldn't use the Voting Rights Act to prevent states from diluting the votes of minority populations. That was the actual thing that Alabama asked for, among other things. And the court could have done it. Mm-hmm. They had, four of the conservatives were willing to do it, right? Thomas wrote a 50-page scene because we won. I can laugh. Thomas wrote this like 50-page dissent that like it was so angry, like you could almost see the spittle on the page as he must have been typing like that cat, like right?
Right.
He was so pissed. It was great. But
Alan
Thomas
Crow
would have
probably had to buy him a
overturned it,
new computer. He's probably
right?
smiling.
Thomas Gorsuch Alito and Amy Coney Barrett all were on board for basically destroying the Voting Rights Act. So they just about had the votes, but John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh flipped, and that was shocking.
Interesting. So we got like a minute and a half left. Tell us about the paperback version. We had Elie on, I think over a year ago, to talk about his New York Times bestselling book, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, which is a fun read. You're going to learn a lot. Now it's paperback, perfect for the summer. Tell us a little bit why it's different. You mentioned early in the show.
Yeah, so just in the original hardcover copy, I wrote about abortion rights, and I wrote about it from the perspective of what the Supreme Court was likely to do to abortion rights in the future. But obviously, between publication and now, they actually did it. They actually did what I said they were going to do, and overturn Roe v. Wade. So I added a chapter kind of explaining what they actually did in Dobbs, but I think more importantly, explaining what originalism and textualism really is, because those are two terms that get thrown around a lot, and a lot of people don't understand what they mean. And I tried to really understand what they mean and how conservatives used it. And I had the help of like a bodega cat to like try to elucidate some of these ideas, and a CNI service dog really helped me kind of explain what originalism and textualism were.
That's great. So again, folks, the book, Allow Me to Retort, Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution. Elie, thank you so much for spending so much time. Don't be a stranger. We'd love to see you more on the show. If you have time, I know you're busy. Have a great night, my friend.
Thank you, Dana. You too.
Take care.